China just put a fighter jet on a carrier deck that the Pentagon did not expect to see for years. Not a stealth jet, not a drone. A heavy twin-engine fighter called the J-15T, launched by an electromagnetic catapult off a Chinese-built aircraft carrier called the Fujian. And for the first time since World War II, a country other than the United States has a warship that can throw fighter jets into the sky using the same core technology as America's newest and most expensive carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford. That single fact is why defense analysts in Washington, London, and Tokyo spent the second half of 2025 rewriting their assumptions about the Pacific. Not because China built a new plane. China has been flying carrier jets since 2012. This is different. This is China closing a technology gap so that Western planners believed would take them another decade to close, if they ever closed it at all. In this video, we're going to break down exactly what the J-15T is, why the catapult matters more than the jet itself, what it means for China's Fujian carrier and the two carriers that came before it, how it stacks up against American carrier aviation, and why some Western military analysts are now openly saying the balance of power in the Pacific has shifted faster than anyone predicted. No hype, no filler, just what's actually happening and what it means. Let's start with the basic problem China has had for over a decade. China's first two aircraft carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, both launched jets using something called a ski jump. If you've ever seen footage of a Chinese carrier, you've probably seen that upward curving ramp at the front of the flight deck. That ramp is the ski jump. A jet powers up its engines, roars down the deck, and uses that upward curve at the end to help throw itself into the air. It works, but it's a compromise, and everyone in naval aviation knows it. A ski jump launch means the jet has to rely almost entirely on its own engine thrust to get off the deck. That limits how heavy the aircraft can be at launch. And how heavy the aircraft can be at launch isn't just about the airframe. It's about fuel and weapons. Every kilogram you can't carry. Because you're using a ski jump is a kilogram of missiles, bombs, or fuel you're leaving on the dock. The United States solved this problem generations ago with catapults. First steam-powered, and now, on the newest Ford-class carrier, electromagnetic. A catapult grabs the aircraft and physically flings it off the deck at takeoff speed, regardless of how heavy that aircraft is loaded. That means American carrier jets can launch at maximum weight, fully fueled, fully armed, every single time. Chinese jets launching off a ski jump carrier historically could not. This is the gap China has spent years trying to close. And the J-15T, combined with the Fujian carrier, is the answer. So what actually is the J-15T? The J-15T is a modified catapult-capable version of China's existing carrier fighter, the J-15, which itself is a heavily reverse-engineered derivative of the Russian Su-33, a big, twin-engine, flanker family fighter, similar in size and shape to Russia's Su-27 lineage. The base J-15 has been flying off Chinese carriers since the early 2010s using the ski jump method. The T variant is purpose-built for catapult launch. The most visible change is the front landing gear. To survive being physically yanked off a flight deck by a catapult, an aircraft's nose gear needs to be dramatically reinforced. A longer, heavier-duty strut, a launch bar that connects to the catapult shuttle, and structural reinforcement throughout the nose section to handle the stress. Regular landing gear would simply fail under that kind of load. China rebuilt the front end of the J-15 to handle it. The second major change is the engines. Earlier J-15 variants relied on Russian-made AL-31F engines. The J-15T that showed up publicly at the Zhuhai Air Show in November 2024 was flying with Chinese-made WS-10 engines instead. That matters for a reason that has nothing to do with performance on paper. It matters because it means China is no longer dependent on Russia for the engines powering its most important carrier fighter. That's a supply chain and strategic independence story as much as it's an engineering one. The third change is avionics. Reports point to an upgraded radar system, a more modern cockpit, and better sensor integration than the original J-15. In plain terms, better situational awareness for the pilot, better targeting, and a jet that's closer to a genuinely modern fighter rather than an older airframe stretched to keep up. Now, here's the part that actually explains why this jet matters so much strategically. Payload and range. Because the J-15T launches via catapult instead of relying on its own engines and a ski jump ramp, it can take off at a significantly heavier weight. That translates directly into more fuel and more weapons per sortie. Some reporting on the J-15T's role as an anti-ship platform describes it carrying 4 YJ-83K anti-ship cruise missiles in a single sortie. Each of those missiles weighs somewhere around 700 kilograms and has a range in the range of roughly 230 kilometers. That's nearly 3 tons of anti-ship firepower in one aircraft, on top of whatever air-to-air missiles and fuel it's also carrying. A ski jump launch would never allow that combination of weapons load and fuel. The catapult makes it possible. Compare that to older generation Western carrier fighters, and you start to see why some analysts have called the J-15T's weapons carrying capacity higher than what a lot of currently deployed Western carrier jets can manage. This isn't a stealth fighter. It was never designed to be one. It's a big, heavy, brute force strike platform, designed to threaten ships, project power over long distances, and do it with a heavier punch than the jets it's replacing. But the jet is only half the story. The other half is the ship it flies from, the Fujian. The Fujian is China's third aircraft carrier and its first that was fully independently designed and built in China from the keel up using catapult technology. It was launched in June 2022, went through years of sea trials starting in May 2024, and was formally commissioned into the Chinese Navy on November 5, 2025, in a ceremony attended personally by President Xi Jinping in Hainan province. With that commissioning, China officially entered what its own state media called a three-carrier era. The numbers on the Fujian are genuinely significant. Full load displacement is somewhere in the 80,000 to 85,000 ton range. It's roughly 316 meters long. And critically, it's equipped with 3 electromagnetic catapults, the same underlying EMALS type technology that powers the United States' newest and most advanced carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford. Before the Fujian existed, the Gerald R. Ford was the only aircraft carrier in the world using electromagnetic catapults instead of older steam-powered systems. Now there are 2. That is the single sentence that explains why this story matters. For the first time in the history of naval aviation, a country other than the United States has fielded a carrier using electromagnetic launch technology. In September 2025, before the Fujian was even formally commissioned, Chinese state media released footage confirming that the ship had successfully conducted catapult-assisted takeoffs and arrested landings for 3 different aircraft types: the J-15T fighter, the J-35 stealth fighter, and the KJ-600, which is China's carrier-based early warning aircraft, roughly comparable in role to the American E-2 Hawkeye. Getting all 3 of those aircraft types operating off the same deck, using the same catapult system in the same testing window, is not a small technical achievement. It signals that China wasn't just testing a single jet, it was validating an entire integrated carrier air wing. That's the part that should get your attention if you're trying to understand where this is heading. A carrier isn't dangerous because of one fighter jet. A carrier is dangerous because of the complete package: strike fighters, an airborne radar picket to extend the ship's sensor range far beyond the horizon, and eventually, likely, dedicated electronic warfare aircraft. China testing the J-15T, the J-35, and the KJ-600 together on the Fujian in the same year is China building that complete package, not just one piece of it. Before we go further, it's worth stepping back and remembering where China's carrier program actually started, because it makes the speed of this progress even more obvious. China's very first carrier, the Liaoning, wasn't even a Chinese design. It began life as an unfinished Soviet carrier called the Varyag, sitting half-built in a Ukrainian shipyard after the collapse of the Soviet Union. China bought the empty hull in 1998, officially claiming it was destined to become a floating casino. It wasn't. China towed it home, rebuilt it from the inside out, and commissioned it as the Liaoning in 2012. That was China's starting point in modern carrier aviation, a refurbished, decades-old Soviet hull with a ski jump deck. From that starting point, China built the Shandong, its first domestically constructed carrier, commissioned in 2019. Still ski jump, but this time built entirely in Chinese shipyards using lessons learned from operating the Liaoning. And now, roughly a decade after Liaoning entered service, China has gone from operating a second-hand Soviet ski jump carrier to operating a domestically designed electromagnetic catapult carrier flying stealth fighters. That's the actual scale of the leap. Most navies that have tried to build catapult carrier capability from scratch have taken far longer, and some, like the United Kingdom with its Queen Elizabeth-class carriers, deliberately chose not to pursue catapults at all because of the cost and complexity involved. China chose to pursue it anyway and got there. Now let's talk about the J-35 for a second, because it changes the picture even further. The J-15T is not China's most advanced carrier aircraft. It's the heavy-hitting, non-stealth workhorse. The J-35 is China's carrier-capable stealth fighter, and it's designed to operate off the same Fujian-class catapults. Put those 2 aircraft on the same carrier, one stealth fighter optimized for penetrating contested airspace and one heavy strike fighter optimized for carrying a large weapons load, and you have a carrier air wing that's built the same way the U.S. Navy builds its own air wings, a mix of stealth and heavy payload aircraft working together rather than a single do-everything jet. So why exactly are Western analysts describing this as shocking? It comes down to timeline. For years, the working assumption in Washington was that China's ski jump carriers, Liaoning and Shandong, represented a real but limited capability, useful for regional power projection, useful for pressuring Taiwan and the South China Sea, but not remotely close to matching the reach and lethality of an American carrier strike group. Catapult technology, and specifically electromagnetic catapult technology, was seen as the genuinely hard problem, the kind of engineering challenge that even a well-resourced, motivated program would need many additional years to solve. China solved it faster than that timeline predicted. The Fujian went from launch in 2022 to a fully validated multi-aircraft type catapult operational carrier by late 2025, roughly 3 years. And it did it with a domestically designed and built EMALS equivalent system, not a copy purchased or stolen wholesale from an existing design. That's the part unsettling Western defense planners. Not just that China caught up, but the pace at which they did it. Western defense commentary through late 2025 and into 2026 has repeatedly circled back to that same point, that the surprise isn't the existence of the Fujian, which had been tracked by satellite imagery and open source analysts for years, but the speed at which it moved from sea trials to a fully validated multi-aircraft type operational carrier. Analysts who had penciled in years of additional testing before China achieved reliable catapult launches watched that timeline collapse to a matter of months once testing actually began in 2025. That kind of compressed timeline forces every naval planning assumption built around a slower Chinese carrier program to be revisited, and revisiting core assumptions is never a comfortable exercise for a military bureaucracy that plans procurement and deployment decades in advance. There's also a symbolic layer to this that shouldn't be underestimated. For decades, the phrase supercarrier with electromagnetic catapults meant exactly one country, the United States. It was one of the clearest, most tangible markers of American naval supremacy. A piece of technology so complex that even close allies with strong shipbuilding industries like the United Kingdom chose not to pursue it for their own newest carriers. China building and fielding that capability domestically on its own timeline, without Western assistance, is as much a statement of industrial capability as it is a statement of military capability. Now, let's be fair and put this in real perspective, because there's a lot of exaggeration online about what this actually means. And a good breakdown has to include the limitations, not just the headline numbers. First, numbers. China has 3 carriers. The United States has 11. Even with the Fujian in service, the raw scale gap between the U.S. Navy's carrier fleet and China's is enormous, and it isn't closing anytime soon. Building, crewing, and operating a carrier strike group is one of the most complex logistical undertakings any military can attempt, and the United States has been doing it continuously, at scale, for 80 years. China commissioning its first EMALS-capable carrier is a major milestone. It is not parity-second propulsion. The Fujian runs on conventional steam turbine propulsion, not nuclear power. American Nimitz and Ford-class carriers are nuclear-powered, which gives them dramatically longer endurance, higher sustained speeds, and the ability to operate essentially indefinitely without needing to refuel the ship itself. A conventionally powered carrier still needs regular refueling, which limits how far from home and how long a carrier group can realistically sustain high-tempo operations. This is a real structural gap, and it's one China's next carrier class, the Type 004, is reportedly aimed at closing with nuclear propulsion, but that's a future carrier, not the Fujian. Third, catapult count. The Fujian has 3 catapults. The Gerald R. Ford has 4. That difference sounds small, but in carrier operations, launch rate matters enormously. It determines how quickly you can get a full strike package into the air, and how quickly you can generate a second wave. One extra catapult is a meaningful advantage in sustained combat operations, not just a number on a spec sheet. Fourth, and maybe most important, experience. The United States Navy has been running catapult carrier operations continuously since the 1950s. That's 70-plus years of institutional knowledge about deck operations, maintenance cycles, pilot training pipelines, safety procedures, and the countless unglamorous logistics problems that come with sustaining high-tempo carrier aviation. China is essentially compressing decades of that learning curve into a handful of years. Some of that can be accelerated with simulation, foreign observation, and sheer resourcing. Some of it genuinely can't. It has to be learned through operational reps, through mistakes, through years of pilots and deck crews building muscle memory. A carrier air wing isn't just hardware, it's a trained, practiced human system, and those take time to mature regardless of how good the hardware is. So here's the honest picture. China has closed the technology gap faster than expected. It has not closed the experience gap, and it has not closed the scale gap. Both of those still heavily favor the United States, and will for years. But, and this is the part that actually matters for the region, You don't need parity with the United States Navy to change the strategic picture in the Western Pacific. You only need enough capability to make Taiwan's defense planners, Japan's defense planners, and Australia's defense planners recalculate their assumptions. And that threshold has already been crossed. Think about what a Fujian-based carrier air wing does to the map. A J-15T launching off a catapult, fully fueled and fully armed with anti-ship missiles, has meaningfully more range and strike weight than the same jet launching off a ski jump. Pair that with a KJ-600 airborne early warning aircraft extending radar coverage far past the horizon, and a J-35 stealth fighter, providing an escort and first look, first shot advantage. And you have a carrier group that can push its reach further from the Chinese mainland than the Liaoning or Shandong ever could. That reach directly affects how far out into the Pacific China can credibly threaten to interdict shipping, contest airspace, or support an operation against Taiwan, and how far out U.S. and allied forces would need to operate from to stay safely outside that engagement envelope. Taiwan specifically sits at the center of why this matters so much right now. Chinese leadership has repeatedly linked its military modernization timeline to symbolic dates, including the People's Liberation Army's 100th anniversary in 2027, and Western military officials have publicly speculated about that date as a marker Beijing may be using internally for combat readiness against Taiwan, regardless of whether an actual invasion is planned for that specific year. A more capable carrier air wing doesn't need to be used to change Taiwan's strategic calculus. Its mere existence changes the range at which Chinese forces could plausibly intercept reinforcements, contest the airspace around the island, or extend a blockade further out to sea than a ski jump carrier group ever could. For Taiwanese and American planners alike, the relevant question isn't, will China use the Fujian in a Taiwan scenario tomorrow? It's, how does the Fujian's existence change the assumptions underneath every existing defense plan for the island? That's a much bigger, slower-moving problem, and it's exactly the kind of problem that doesn't get solved with a press release. This is also why Japan and Australia have been watching Fujian's development so closely, alongside the United States. It's not really about a single ship or a single jet. It's about what China's naval aviation is going to look like once the Type 0 or SOAR, the reportedly nuclear-powered successor, enters the picture in the years ahead. The Fujian and the J-15T are the proof of concept. If China can build and integrate catapult carrier aviation successfully with the Fujian, there's no obvious reason to assume they can't scale that same playbook into a larger, more capable fleet. There's one more piece worth flagging because it's easy to miss if you're only looking at the fighter jets, the engines. The shift from Russian AL-31F engines to domestically produced WS-10 engines on the J-15T isn't just a performance upgrade. It's a signal about China's broader defense. Industrial trajectory. For years, one of the recurring critiques of Chinese military aviation was dependency on Russian engine technology, a real vulnerability if that supply relationship ever became strained or politically complicated. Powering its most important new carrier fighter with a domestic engine is China telling the world, deliberately, that dependency is going away. Put all of that together, and you can see why this isn't really a story about one airplane. It's a story about China compressing a multi-decade technology curve into a handful of years, doing it with domestic engineering rather than imports, and doing it in a way specifically aimed at power projection in the exact waters where the United States, Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines all have direct strategic interests. It's also worth addressing the comparison that comes up constantly in comment sections whenever this topic comes up. Is the J-15T better than America's carrier fighters like the F/A-18 Super Hornet or the F-35C? That's the wrong question, and it's worth explaining why. The F-35C is a stealth aircraft built around sensor fusion, low observability, and first look, first shot advantage in contested airspace. Its value isn't in raw payload, it's in surviving and operating in environments a non-stealth aircraft can't. The J-15T isn't trying to compete in that category at all. It's a heavy, non-stealth strike fighter built to carry a large weapons load a long distance and put steel on target, particularly against ships. Comparing the two head-to-head is a bit like comparing a sniper rifle to an artillery piece. Different tools, different jobs, both dangerous in the role they're built for. The real comparison that matters is J-15T versus J-15T's own predecessor, the ski jump J-15B. And on that comparison, the improvement in range, payload, and mission flexibility is enormous and undeniable. So where does this leave the aircraft carrier race going forward? The United States still holds the advantage in scale, in nuclear propulsion, in decades of institutional carrier experience, and in the sheer number of hulls it can deploy simultaneously across multiple oceans. That advantage is not disappearing, But the gap that used to separate the US Navy from everyone else in carrier aviation has narrowed in a way almost nobody expected this quickly. China now has the core technology: electromagnetic catapults, a validated multi-aircraft air wing, and a heavy payload strike fighter purpose-built to use that technology. That used to be the exclusive property of one country on Earth. The next few years are going to be about watching whether China can turn the Fujian from a proof of concept into a genuinely combat-ready, sustained carrier strike capability, building real operational tempo, real pilot experience, and real deployment history. And they're going to be about watching whether the rumored Type 04, potentially nuclear-powered, moves from speculation into reality. If it does, the conversation about the aircraft carrier race changes again, and probably not in the West's favor. For now, the honest takeaway is this: the J-15T isn't shocking because it's a revolutionary aircraft on its own. It's shocking because of what it proves China can now do: build, integrate, and operate the exact category of carrier technology that used to be considered America's alone. That's the story, not one jet. A capability gap that closed faster than anyone in Washington planned for. If you want to understand where the Pacific goes from here, that's the number to watch. Not how many carriers China has, but how fast they're closing the gap on the ones that matter most. Let me know in the comments what you think China's next move looks like, and if you want a full breakdown of the J-35 stealth fighter and how it fits into the same carrier air wing, say so below and I'll cover it next.